Kang-dae stood before the iron gates of Olympus Academy, the most expensive boarding school in Korea. To the world, he was just a transfer student from a small provincial town, but in his pocket, he clutched a black card that could buy the school twice over. His father, the cold-blooded chairman of Nexus Tech, had sent him here with one instruction: do not exist. To the chairman, Kang-dae was a mistake that needed to be hidden behind high walls and expensive tuition. As he walked onto the manicured lawn, the air felt heavy with the scent of old money and fresh ambition. He wore a generic watch and a scuffed backpack, blending into the background like a shadow. He didn't want the tech empire or the scandals that came with it. He just wanted a life where his name didn't trigger a stock market fluctuation. But in a place where your father's net worth determined your seat in the cafeteria, staying a nobody was going to be his hardest mission yet. While Kang-dae sought the shadows, Seo-yun lived for the spotlight. He first saw her in the library at 2 a.m., surrounded by towering stacks of business journals and empty espresso cups. Seo-yun was the top-ranked scholarship student, a girl who treated life like a battlefield where the only victory was a high-paying corporate title. She didn't have a family name to lean on, only a fierce, desperate hunger to climb the social ladder until she could look down on everyone who had ever pitied her. "You're staring," she said without looking up from her laptop. Kang-dae was struck by the intensity in her eyes. They weren't filled with the boredom of the rich, but the fire of someone who had everything to lose. She told him her goal was simple: to work for Nexus Tech and become the youngest director in their history. Kang-dae felt a cold shiver. The very empire he was running from was the throne she was willing to die for. The social hierarchy at Olympus was brutal. During lunch, the royals, children of the top 5 conglomerates, occupied the central table, while everyone else orbited them. Seo-yun spent her time trying to catch their attention, offering to help with their projects just to be in their periphery. Kang-dae watched from a corner, eating a simple convenience store kimbap, disgusted by how the heirs treated her like a useful tool. He wanted to tell her that the people she admired were hollow, but he knew she wouldn't listen to a pauper. When a wealthy heir intentionally spilled soda on Seo-yun's only blazer, Kang-dae almost stood up to intervene. He felt the weight of his secret identity pressing against his chest. One phone call to his father's secretary could get that heir expelled. Instead, he stayed seated, watching Seo-yun wipe her sleeve with a dignified, silent rage that broke his heart. Despite his desire to be invisible, Kang-dae found himself following Seo-yun to the school's rooftop. She was there practicing her pitch for a national entrepreneurship competition. Her voice trembled slightly from exhaustion, but her vision for a social impact startup was brilliant. Kang-dae realized then that she wasn't just chasing money, she was chasing the security she'd never had. He stepped out of the shadows and offered a single sharp critique of her business model. Seo-yun was stunned. This quiet, poor transfer student possessed an instinctive understanding of venture capital that usually took decades to acquire. "How do you know that?" she demanded, eyes narrowing. Kang-dae shrugged, claiming he'd read a lot of books in his old town's library. For the first time, a small smile played on her lips. They spent the rest of the night refining her plan, 2 outcasts bonded by a secret, one hiding his wealth, the other hiding her poverty. The peace was shattered when a fleet of black sedans pulled up to the school. It wasn't for Kang-dae, but for the chairman's official son, the legitimate heir, Han-jun. Han-jun was everything Kang-dae was not: loud, arrogant, and draped in designer labels. The entire school bowed as he walked through the halls, including Seo-yun. Kang-dae retreated into a bathroom stall, his heart racing as he heard his half-brother's voice outside. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, seeing the same jawline and the same cold eyes of the chairman. The resemblance was a ticking bomb. If Seo-yun found out he was the son of the man she idolized, would she love him, or would she see him as a shortcut to her goals? He realized that as long as he stayed a nobody, their connection was real. If he became a somebody, he would just be another asset for her to acquire. The autumn rains hit Seoul with a vengeance, flooding the lower levels of the campus. While the wealthy students called private drivers, Seo-yun stood at the bus stop shivering in her thin blazer and clutching her laptop bag like a shield. Kang-dae approached her, holding a single sturdy umbrella he'd bought from a local mart. He didn't offer her a ride in a limousine, though he could have summoned one with a text. Instead, he offered his side, shielding her from the wind. As they walked, Seo-yun confessed that her scholarship was under review because of a wealthy rival's sabotage. The vulnerability in her voice was a sharp contrast to her usual ironclad persona. "I can't fail. If I don't make it out of here, I'm nothing," she whispered. Kang-dae reached out, his hand hovering over hers. He made a silent vow. He would help her reach the top without revealing his name, proving that he was more than just his father's bloodline. Han-jun, the legitimate heir, began to notice the pauper duo in the library. He was used to everyone growling, but Kang-dae's refusal to look him in the eye felt like a personal insult. Driven by a cruel curiosity, Han-jun decided to target Seo-yun, offering her an internship at Nexus Tech if she would humiliate Kang-dae during the upcoming school festival. He wanted to see how much the girl who loved success was willing to sacrifice for a nobody. Seo-yun was torn. The internship was her ultimate dream, the golden ticket she had stayed awake for years. Kang-dae saw the internal struggle written on her face as she looked at the contract Han-jun had tossed on her desk. He didn't say a word, waiting to see if the woman he was falling for would choose her ambition or the quiet connection they had built in the library's dust. The night of the school festival was a display of grotesque wealth. While the heirs threw champagne parties, Seo-yun stood on the stage for the debate competition. Han-jun sat in the front row, a smug grin on his face, waiting for her to deliver the scripted insult that would crush Kang-dae's reputation. Kang-dae watched from the back, his heart heavy. He had his phone ready to transfer a massive anonymous donation to her tuition fund, but he wanted her to choose him first. When it was Seo-yun's turn to speak, she looked at the contract in her mind, and then at Kang-dae. She tore up her prepared notes. Instead of attacking him, she delivered a blistering critique of the conglomerate culture that Nexus Tech represented. The room went silent. She had effectively burned her bridge to Han-jun's favor. Kang-dae felt a rush of pride so intense it terrified him. She had chosen her integrity over her dream. After the debate, Han-jun was livid. He cornered Seo-yun in the hallway, mocking her for throwing away her future for a charity case like Kang-dae. Before he could grab her arm, Kang-dae stepped in. The air between the two half-brothers crackled with a strange, unspoken energy. For a moment, Kang-dae almost let his elite training show. The way he carried himself, the way he spoke with the cold authority of the chairman. "Leave her alone," Kang-dae said, his voice low and dangerous. Han-jun recoiled, confused by the sudden shift in the nobody's aura. "Who do you think you are?" Han-jun hissed. Kang-dae didn't answer. He simply led Seo-yun away, but the seed of suspicion was planted. Han-jun noticed the way Kang-dae's eyes looked exactly like the portrait of the chairman hanging in the Nexus Tech lobby. The hunt for the truth was officially begun. They escaped to a small, hidden terrace overlooking the city lights. Seo-yun was trembling, not from cold, but from the realization that she had just sabotaged her life's plan. "I'm ruined," she laughed breathlessly, tears welling up. "Why did I do that? You're just a quiet boy with a cheap backpack." Kang-dae pulled her into a hug, the first time they had truly touched. The scent of her hair and the sound of her heart racing drowned out the world. "You're not ruined. he promised, his voice muffled against her shoulder. He realized to save her dreams, he might have to sacrifice his anonymity. He could give her everything, the internship, the career, the security, but it would mean stepping back into the golden cage he hated. As they shared their first kiss under the Seoul skyline, Kang-dae knew the timer on his secret was running out. He had to decide, save her future or keep his soul. Han-jun could not shake the feeling of déjà vu after his confrontation with Kang-dae. He spent the night in his dorm room scouring the digital archives of his father's past, looking for any trace of a scandal. He knew his father was a man of many secrets, but the thought of a rival bloodline was a threat to his very existence. He hired a private investigator using his emergency fund, sending a grainy photo of Kang-dae from the school's security feed. Meanwhile, Kang-dae and Seo-yun lived in a brief bubble of bliss. They spent their afternoons in a small, off-campus library where no one from Olympus Academy ventured. Seo-yun was beginning to accept her ruined status, finding a strange freedom in not having to impress the elite anymore. However, Kang-dae watched her when she thought he wasn't looking. He saw her lingering over business news, her eyes still hungry for the world she had renounced for him. The atmosphere at Olympus Academy turned icy when the black and gold helicopter of Nexus Tech landed on the athletic field. Chairman Kang stepped out, his presence commanding an immediate, suffocating silence. He wasn't there for a graduation or a donation ceremony. He was there because he had heard whispers of a student who looked too much like a Kang. The faculty scrambled to accommodate him, but his eyes were fixed on the student roster. Kang-dae saw the helicopter from the science wing window and felt the blood drain from his face. He knew his father's arrival meant his period of grace was over. He tried to find Seo-yun to warn her, but the school was already under lockdown for the VVIP visit. He realized that the chairman wasn't just checking in, he was hunting. The shadow Kang-dae had lived in was being burned away by the bright, harsh light of his father's scrutiny. Seo-yun was heading to the counselor's office when she turned a corner and ran straight into the chairman's entourage. The man looked at her with a terrifying indifference, but his assistant paused, whispering something in the chairman's ear. They knew she was the girl who had defended the nobody. Chairman Kang stopped and looked at her, his gaze like a cold blade. "So, you are the one distracting my—" He paused, a cruel smile. "Investment." Seo-yun's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't understand why the most powerful man in the country was speaking to her. Before she could respond, Kang-dae appeared at the end of the hall. He didn't bow, he didn't move. He stood tall, his eyes meeting the chairman's with a defiance that shocked everyone in the corridor. The secret was out. The nobody and the everything were finally standing in the same frame. The chairman demanded a private meeting in the headmaster's office, but he insisted Seo-yun stay. If she is the reason you are failing your duty to remain invisible, she should see what you truly are, the chairman hissed. He laid out a folder on the mahogany desk, a contract that would officially recognize Kang-dae as a secondary heir, granting him billions in stock. But on one condition. He had to leave for the American branch immediately, alone. Seo-yun watched the scene play out like a dream, her head spinning. The boy who shared convenience store ramen with her was the prince of the empire she worshipped. She felt a sickening sense of betrayal mixed with awe. If he signed, she could finally have the connection to Nexus she always wanted, but she would lose the boy she loved. The wealth she had chased her whole life was finally within reach, but it felt like a cage. The chairman didn't wait for a private answer. He walked out to the school's central plaza where the students had gathered in curiosity. With a voice that boomed through the speakers, he introduced Kang-dae as his son, the hidden genius of the Kang family. The social hierarchy of Olympus Academy flipped in an instant. The students who had mocked Kang-dae now bowed their heads, and the heirs who had bullied him looked on in terror. Kang-dae stood on the podium with the cameras of the school's media club flashing in his face. He looked for Seo-yun in the crowd, but she was backing away, her face pale. She saw the way the other students were already treating him, with a fearful reverence. He was no longer her partner in the shadows. He was a god in their world. As the chairman placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, Kang-dae realized that his identity had become a weapon that was cutting the person he loved the most. The day after the reveal, the school felt like a different planet. Kang-dae moved through the halls surrounded by a phalanx of security guards, his old, scuffed backpack replaced by a designer leather case he hadn't asked for. Students who once ignored him now lined the corridors, whispering his name like a prayer. He tried to approach Seo-yun at her locker, but the crowd parted for him with such terrifying speed that it felt like he was a monster. Seo-yun wouldn't look at him. Every time she saw his face, she saw the Nexus Tech logo and the cold eyes of the chairman. The boy who shared convenience store ramen with her felt like a ghost, replaced by a titan of industry. "You lied," she whispered when he finally caught her alone in the stairwell. Kang-dae tried to explain that he was protecting her, but she laughed bitterly. To her, his poverty was a cruel game, a vacation into a struggle that she had no choice but to live in. Ironically, Seo-yun's dream came true in the worst possible way. Because she was the girl Kang-dae liked, the faculty treated her like royalty, and the royals invited her to their tables. But the invitations were hollow. They didn't want her brilliance, they wanted her influence over the new heir. She found herself sitting at the center of the cafeteria, surrounded by people who used to step on her, feeling more alone than she ever had as a scholarship student. Han-jun watched this from the sidelines, his jealousy festering into a dark obsession. He began spreading rumors that Seo-yun had known Kang-dae's identity all along and had seduced him to secure her future. The narrative shifted from a romance to a cold-blooded calculation. Seo-yun's hard-earned reputation for integrity was being dismantled by the very wealth she had once craved, and she realized that being chosen by a Kang was a death sentence for her own identity. Determined to reclaim his sole spot as the sole heir, Han-jun initiated a dangerous game. He approached Seo-yun with a partnership. He offered to help her regain her academic standing and clear her name if she helped him find evidence of Kang-dae's mother, the one person the chairman wanted to keep buried. Han-jun knew that if he could provoke Kang-dae into a public scandal involving his mother, the chairman would disown him once more to protect the stock price. Seo-yun faced a choice that tested her soul. She was drowning in the rumors and the pressure of her new status. If she helped Han-jun, she could fix her life and distance herself from the Kang family drama, but it would mean betraying the boy who had looked at her with such sincerity on the rooftop. She saw Kang-dae across the courtyard, looking exhausted and trapped, and she realized that while she was losing her reputation, he was losing his very self. Kang-dae escaped his guards by climbing through a kitchen window, meeting Seo-yun in an overgrown, abandoned garden behind the old gymnasium. It was the only place the cameras didn't reach. For a moment, the tension melted. He told Seo-yun at his mother, a woman who loved art and hated the corporate world, who died waiting for a man who never came. He confessed that his black card felt like lead in his pocket. "I don't want the empire, Seo-yun. I want the girl in the library," he said, his voice breaking. He offered to run away with her, to give up the inheritance and live a normal life. But Seo-yun was a realist. She knew that the chairman would never let a valuable asset go, and she knew that she could never be happy knowing he had given up a billion-dollar future for her. Their love was no longer just a feeling, it was a geopolitical conflict. The chairman announced a massive gala at the school to celebrate the merger of his two sons into the corporate structure. It was a mandatory event for the top-ranking students. Kang-dae was forced into a tuxedo that felt like armor, standing on a stage as a symbol of Nexus Tech's future. Seo-yun was invited as his guest, but she knew it was a trap. The chairman wanted to show her just how small she was compared to the world they inhabited.
As the music played and the elite of Seoul watched, Han-jun leaned in to whisper to Kang-dae that he had found his mother's old journals. The threat was clear: comply or the world would see the shameful truth of his origin. Kang-dae looked at Seo-yun, who was standing by the punch bowl, looking beautiful but broken. He realized that the only way to save her and himself was to play the game better than his father. The nobody was gone. The prince was about to strike. Kang-dae spent the week following the gala transforming. He stopped fighting the suits and the security. Instead, he began using them. He realized that to protect Seo-yun, he had to become the very thing he hated, a master of leverage. He began attending his father's board meetings, sitting in the back and absorbing every detail of the company's vulnerabilities. He wasn't looking for a way in, he was looking for the structural weaknesses he could use to bargain for his freedom. Seo-yun watched him from a distance, terrified by the coldness settling into his eyes. He no longer looked like the boy who critiqued her business model. He looked like a young version of the chairman. However, every night she found a small handwritten note tucked into her textbook. They were simple messages, like "trust me" or "don't stop dreaming." He was fighting a war on two fronts, maintaining his soul in secret while wearing a mask of corporate steel to deceive his brother and father. Seo-yun realized she couldn't just wait to be saved. If she was going to be a success, she would do it on her own terms. She organized a secret union among the scholarship students, the nobodies who kept the school running. They began documenting the bullying and the unethical shortcuts taken by the royals to maintain their grades. Seo-yun was building her own empire, one built on information and collective power, rather than inheritance. When Han-jun tried to threaten her again, she didn't flinch. She showed him a recording of his own illegal gambling activities on school grounds. "I don't need a Kang to be powerful," she said, her voice steady. For the first time, she wasn't looking up at the summit of the mountain. She was building a new path around it. Kang-dae saw her boldness and felt a spark of hope. They were no longer victims of their circumstances. They were becoming the architects of a new order. Han-jun, pushed to the edge by Seo-yun's defiance, finally leaked a redacted version of Kang-dae's mother's journal to the school's anonymous forum. The entries painted a picture of a woman broken by the chairman's cruelty. The school erupted in scandal. The secret son was no longer a fairy tale prince. He was the product of a tragedy. The chairman was furious, not for the woman's sake, but because the Nexus Tech stock began to dip under the negative PR. Kang-dae found the journal in the school library, the pages stained with his mother's tears. Instead of hiding, he did the unthinkable. He walked into the media center and broadcasted a live reading of the journal to the entire school and the press waiting outside the gates. He took his father's shame and turned it into a weapon of truth. By exposing the chairman's inhumanity, he stripped the gold-plated name of its power. He was no longer a secret, he was a revolution. The chairman called an emergency meeting to disown Kang-dae, but Kang-dae walked in with Seo-yun by his side. She wasn't just his girlfriend, she was his consultant. Using the data she had gathered about the school's corruption and the leaked journal, they presented a case to the minority shareholders. They argued that the chairman's old-school ruthlessness was a liability in a modern, transparent market. Kang-dae didn't want to take his father's chair, he wanted to reform it. The tension in the room was suffocating. The chairman laughed, calling them children playing at business. But then, several key board members who had been quietly approached by Kang-dae over the past weeks stood up in support. They saw in Kang-dae a leader who had the chairman's brilliance, but possessed the one thing the chairman lacked, a conscience. Seo-yun stood tall, her business journals replaced by real-world power, realizing that her success was finally happening. The coup was successful, but it came with a heavy cost. To stabilize the company, Kang-dae had to agree to a 2-year transition period where he would be tied to the headquarters in Seoul, working 18-hour days. He had saved the company and his mother's legacy, but he had lost his nobody life forever. He stood in the empty school auditorium where he first saw Seo-yun, the weight of the billion-dollar birthright now firmly on his shoulders. Seo-yun met him there, her bags packed. She had been offered a full ride to an elite university in London, a dream she had worked for her entire life. They stood at a crossroads. They had defeated the villains and claimed their power, but their paths were pulling them in opposite directions. "We won," Kang-dae said, though his voice sounded like a defeat. They were no longer the shadow and the striver. They were two leaders who had outgrown the walls of Olympus Academy. The tension at the departure gates at Incheon Airport felt like the edge of the world. Kang-dae stood behind a barrier of black-suited security, watching Seo-yun hold her one-way ticket to London. They were no longer the outcasts of Olympus Academy. He was the acting director of Nexus Tech, and she was the most promising scholar of her generation. He wanted to beg her to stay, to use his vast resources to build her a kingdom in Seoul, but he knew that would be a betrayal of the very independence he loved. "Go and conquer the world, Seo-yun," he whispered as they shared a final, hurried embrace. She looked into his eyes, seeing the exhaustion of a boy who had traded his youth for a boardroom seat. He promised to write, not as a subordinate or a social climber, but as an equal. As her plane disappeared into the gray Seoul sky, Kang-dae turned back to his waiting limousine, feeling the crushing weight of his gold-plated cage once again. A year passed in a blur of spreadsheets and red-eye flights. Kang-dae revolutionized Nexus Tech, turning it into a beacon of ethical innovation, just as he had promised. He lived in a penthouse that overlooked the city, yet he spent his nights staring at a small, framed photo of a library desk. Seo-yun's letters were his only lifeline. She wrote of the rainy London streets and her grueling internships, her words filled with the same fire that had first drawn him to her in the library school. However, the silence between the letters grew longer as their respective worlds expanded. The CEO's secret son was now a global figure, and Seo-yun was becoming a formidable name in international finance. The media began to speculate about Kang-dae's love life, pairing him with various heiresses. Each tabloid headline was a knife to their connection. They were succeeding in everything they had ever dreamed of, yet the fulfillment they felt on that dusty school rooftop seemed like a lifetime ago. In an unexpected turn, a humbled Han-jun approached Kang-dae. After being sidelined by the board, he had spent a year in reflection away from the toxic influence. He didn't ask for his old position back. Instead, he handed Kang-dae a file on a secret property their mother had owned, a small house in the countryside, untouched by the chairman's lawyers. "You have the money, but you don't have a home," Han-jun said, his voice devoid of the old malice. This gesture broke something inside Kang-dae. He realized he had been so focused on being a better CEO than his father that he had forgotten why he fought for the position in the first place. He wasn't supposed to be the keeper of the empire. He was supposed to be the one who survived it. He looked at the deed to the small house and then at the calendar. Seo-yun was graduating in a week. For the first time in 2 years, the prince decided to go AWOL. Seo-yun stood on the Millennium Bridge, clutching her honors degree. She had achieved the success at any cost she had once prayed for, but the victory felt hollow without the boy who had seen her soul through her blazer. Suddenly, a familiar shadow fell over her. She turned to find Kang-dae, dressed not in a bespoke suit, but in a simple hoodie and jeans, the nobody she had first met. He had left the board meeting, the security, and the black card. "I'm resigning," he said, the wind catching his hair. He explained that he had appointed a professional board to run Nexus Tech and handed the family legacy over to a trust. He didn't want to be a titan. He wanted to be the man who helped her pick up her bouquet. Seo-yun cried as she realized he had finally chosen his soul over his birthright. They stood in the middle of the bridge, two successful individuals who realized that the greatest wealth was the freedom to choose each other. The story ends not in a skyscraper, but in the small countryside house Han-jun had found. There are no cameras, no boardrooms, and no social hierarchies. Kang-dae and Seo-yun started a small tech consultancy together, helping local businesses thrive, a true social impact startup. They aren't the 0.01% anymore, but they are finally whole. The CEO's secret son is no longer a secret, and the girl who wanted success finally found it in the quietest place imaginable. As the sun sets over their garden, Kang-dae looks at Seo-yun, who is busy sketching a new business plan. She is still the striver, and he is still the man who loves her brilliance. They learned that money can build a palace, but only truth can build a home. Their journey from the halls of Olympus Academy to this small patch of earth proved that the ultimate fulfillment isn't about how much you own, but how much of yourself you are willing to keep.